Clearing the Apocalypse difficulty may be an arduous task for a lot of players in Remnant 2, especially for beginners, so we decided to come up with a Remnant 2 build that will give anyone a footing in said difficulty. The Regenerator is a Remnant 2 build that relies on damage reductions to withstand the heavy damage dealing attacks from bosses and mobs alike. Additionally, it has insane health regeneration and great mobility. This build also counters status-inflicting attacks and commands minions in combat. One thing that I really love about the Regenerator build is how beginner-friendly it is. Having prior experience will not be an issue for new players, as this Remnant 2 build allows for plenty of mistakes in combat, especially when adjusting to the hardest difficulty, and still comes out just fine. Tanking damage is the focus of this build, thus it is expected that its overall DPS will be lower than usual, so fights will be a little bit longer. However, you will be more confident in terms of survivability, even when facing the greatest threats the game has to offer. Starting with the Regenerator archetypes, the prime archetype for this build is the Medic archetype due to its superb healing passives and its top-notch prime perk. Its prime perk, Regenerator, allows us to refund a Relic charge after restoring 250 health points to a party. Other than your own character and players in the field, minions are affected by this trait, so it is fairly easy to achieve the Medic's prime perk condition. For the Medic's skill, I suggest picking up Wellspring to have an additional source of healing other than a Relic, just in case you need it. This skill places a healing puddle on the ground that provides even more health regeneration per second, useful when tanking damage. You do have an option to use Healing Shield instead if you don't prefer the Wellspring skill. Healing Shield provides shields to the party while regenerating 34% of their max health. Although I don't use both of these skills that much when playing single player, since I rely on my Relic charges alone when I need healing and damage mitigation, these skills are still nice to have. The Medic's damage perk, Invigorated, is nice as well. Adding a 25% increase to all damage and 5% critical chance are more than welcome additions for this Remnant 2 build to improve its overall DPS. One of the key perks of this build is the Medic's team perk, Benevolence. What it does is it further increases our Relic efficacy by 15% and heals our allies. This perk helps us achieve the prime perk's condition efficiently, since the total healing amount that you and your minions will receive is more than enough to score a Relic refund. Lastly would be the Relic perk Benefactor that quickens our Relic usage speed by 20%, which stacks nicely with our Glutton trait later on. For the second archetype, Summoner will take the spot since you'll be relying on minions in this Remnant 2 build. I love to use the Flyer minions for various reasons, such as they seldomly die in the field and can deal consistent damage to my targets. However, you are welcome to try the other two minions available, as all types can receive healing, so feel free to be creative on this one. The Summoner's Dominator damage perk synergizes nicely with this build, as we'll be using mods, and a 35% mod damage boost and 5% mod critical chance are great additions to our overall damage. As mentioned previously, your flyers are mostly present on the battlefield, so expect to have a consistent damage boost from this perk. We'll be using a lot of Relic charges in this build, thus the Incite Relic perk of the Summoner will be utilized. You can enjoy a constant 15% boost to your minions' damage, a 15% crit chance buff, and a little bit of health regeneration thanks to it. Moving on to the Regenerator's equipment, we are going to focus mainly on damage reduction and survivability for this build. In terms of DPS, our options are quite limited. For this reason, I played around a bit with negative status effects, as they are easy to retain. Now for the weapons. I generally prefer automatic rifles when choosing my equipment. For this setup, I suggest using the Merciless due to its insane raw firepower alone, and its ability to effortlessly inflict bleed. This gun's overall effectiveness is also drastically improved by its mod, the Bloodline mod. This unique mod fires a penetrating blast that can deal a considerable amount of damage thanks to its 25% critical damage bonus. Aside from it being easy to use, its mod power requirement is relatively low, making it accessible most of the time. For the Merciless's mutator, I decided to use the Prophecy, one of the latest mutators added with the Awakened King DLC. We'll be using the Bloodline mod frequently, so the Prophecy's additional 30% mod power generation at max stacks and 10% mod power requirement reduction works well with this setup, making Bloodline always accessible. If you want more critical hits, Momentum is more than a qualified mutator for the Merciless. You'll have a slower mod power generation rate in exchange for more critical hits. For the handgun, another automatic gun that I prefer using is TAC-22. I find its speedy fire rate ideal, and we will be using the gun to inflict a burn status effect on our targets. This is possible if you pair it with the Hotshot mod, which increases our range damage by 15% as well upon using it. Since we will be playing with elemental damage and elemental status effects with this build, I prefer using the Maelstrom mutator for this weapon, another mutator that increases the Hotshot mod's DPS, and the 20% mod power generation that this mutator provides is a nice bonus. Using the Krell Axe for this build is the way to go for melee weapon. Throwing the Krell Axe at enemies will inflict an overloaded status effect and deal shock damage. One of the latest mutators, the Tainted Blade, makes it even more potent by adding a corroded status when the thrown axe hits the target. This is possible since throwing the Krell Axe is considered a charged melee attack. Now that the weapons are out of the way, let's discuss the Regenerator's Trinkets. Since this build is all about damage reduction, I decided to play with a Bulwark buff. Essentially, this buff adds more damage reduction to the build, so we can effectively tank incoming damage. For Amulet, I suggest using the Red Doe Sigil for its additional 30% Relic healing effectiveness, which doubles when the wearer's health is below 50%. This makes our Relic even more effective in terms of healing. For our first ring, we'll choose the Ring of Omens. The main reason why I picked this ring is when the Ring of Omens is paired with the Red Doe Sigil, it allows us to convert our regular dodge rolls to Misty Steps. This allows this build to effortlessly maneuver around the arena without any weight or movement restrictions, which will be discussed later on. This special ability costs health every time you use it, but with the healing capabilities we have, it will simply not be an issue. So the next ring on the list, and also a new ring, is the Dried Clay Ring, which grants us a permanent 1 stack of Bulwark upon wearing it. Aside from the Bulwark buff, it increases this build's overall damage depending on how many stacks of Bulwark are active. The third ring that I find useful is the Blessed Ring. Upon using a Relic, which we'll be doing a lot, it grants us 2 stacks of Bulwark. In combination with the Dried Clay Ring, the build can achieve 3 stacks of Bulwark in total, which equates to an 18% damage reduction when the Relic effect is active. The last ring for this setup is the Seal of the Empress. Straightforwardly, this ring increases max health by 20 but reduces max stamina by 5. I like using this ring to increase my survivability, and its negative effect can be disregarded since we will not be using stamina in this build. When it comes to armor sets for this build, I highly suggest wearing the Leto Mark 1 pieces aside from the gloves and wearing the Labyrinth gauntlets instead. This combination will provide you with the highest armor in the game currently. If you do not have the Leto Mark 1 armor, I suggest equipping Leto Mark 2 pieces instead. Total armor will be lower, but it should work just fine. It provides good protection, but it is also heavy. Wearing this set will give you the flop status when trying to dodge that will easily be offset by Misty Step. For this specific build, Crystal Heart is the best relic in my opinion, which regenerates 145% of your max health over 10 seconds. Not only can it provide a massive amount of healing over time, but it also reduces incoming damage by a whopping 25% within the set duration. However, the greatest drawback of this relic is that it also reduces our movement speed by 50%. In this matter, this is where the Misty Step shines again. This is one of the primary reasons why we upgraded our dodge rolls, as we can freely bypass the movement speed debuff and effortlessly move around the battlefield. Moving on to the relic fragments, I suggest slotting health, damage reduction, and healing effectiveness. This setup is tailored to further improve our tanking capabilities. Let's talk about the damage reduction relic fragment. The mythic damage reduction fragment grants the build an additional 5% damage reduction. If you followed my previous suggestions, this build should now have a total of 79.9% total damage reduction when you use a relic. With a combined damage reduction from the 3 stacks of Bulwark, Armor Set, the Crystal Heart effect, Relic Fragment, and traits, we almost reached the cap of 80% damage reduction. Having a 79.9% damage reduction, incoming damage will be noticeably weaker, and you can almost tank all types of boss attacks in the game. The suggested traits for the Regenerator are somewhat limited, however, feel free to change what you think will be best on a specific scenario. The set of traits that I'm running currently are as follows. Choosing the Medic archetype will grant the build a free level 10 triage that can help improve its overall health regeneration capability. Picking up the Summoner archetype will provide a level 10 regrowth trait that keeps the character in good shape by further increasing health regeneration per second. One of the reasons why this build reached our ideal damage reduction percentage is we upgraded Fortify to level 10. This trait increases armor effectiveness by 50%, so make sure to max it out as well. Our overall damage comes from the Merciless, minions, and negative status effects. For this reason, upgrading the Affliction trait to level 10 will double all the negative status effect durations by 100%, leading to more damage over time. The next trait on the list is a level 10 Vigor to have the juicy additional 30 health points. Accessing the Bloodline mod as frequently as possible is ideal for this build, so I suggest upgrading the Spirit trait to level 10 to take advantage of that 20% mod power generation. Upgrade Bloodstream to level 10 to increase Grey health regeneration by 3. This almost negates the Ring of Omen's health cost, as it leaves Grey health that you can just heal in no time. To help us cut incoming damage further, a level 10 Blood Bond is a must. This trait allows minions to absorb 10% of the damage taken by the caster. Your minions will suffer additional damage every time you get hit, but this is not going to be an issue as you can easily patch them up with relics, and it's actually beneficial for this build as they can help you score that relic refund more frequently by having damage to heal. The next trait is a level 10 Glutton trait to help us quicken our relic usage speed. Note that the sooner the Crystal Heart takes effect, the better. Remember that a huge chunk of this build's damage reduction comes from the Crystal Heart's effect and from the Blessed Ring's Bulwark stacks, which activate upon consuming a relic. At level 10, the Rugged trait is advisable to increase your minions' health by 100% so they'll last longer in battle. Upgrading Bark Skin to level 6 grants the build with 6% additional damage reduction, and this is the last bump that you'll need to almost reach the damage reduction cap. The last trait on this list is a level 2 Fitness trait that adds a little bit of evade distance percentage for the Misty Step. That is already 85 points in total, and if you want to prioritize movement speed and increase your Misty Step's evade distance, I suggest maxing out the Fitness trait to level 10 and making Affliction level 2. Now for the concoction, I'm running this build with Mudtooth's Tonic to take advantage of that bonus of 25 health points, which increases this build's survivability further. Final tips. A couple of useful suggestions before we wrap up this build guide. The Regenerator is an easy and fun build to play with. This build can grant anyone a much more forgiving experience, especially when playing in Apocalypse difficulty. It can take multiple hits for you, but it's not immortal. The main goal of this build is to give you that wiggle room to adjust. Eventually, you will be learning to avoid some of the hardest hitting attacks in the game, and it's fairly easy to do with Misty Step, so use this to your advantage when you need it. If you're wondering how to play this build effectively, this is what I usually do in boss fights. When the battle starts, summon both of your flyers and watch out for their health. Heal them if necessary, and try not to let them die. Throw the Krell Axe to your target and inflict both overloaded and corroded status effects. Then switch to the Tech 22 and activate the Hotshot mod to apply the burning status effect. Use all of the initial Bloodline mod charges and fire the Merciless until you regain 3 charges of Bloodline mod. Use all of them again and repeat from the start to refresh or reapply all the negative status effects. Using the Crystal Heart at the right moment is one of the key strategies of this build. Usually I use it when I want to tank certain attacks instead of dodging, so I can counterattack and deal damage instead. Utilizing this setup will provide you with a generous amount of relic charges when used correctly. Thus, it is advisable to determine the right situations to do so. In many instances, the relic refunds retained my relic charges at max even after a hard and long boss fight. So that wraps up the Regenerator build. This is the second of our The Awakened King DLC builds. I hope you guys are enjoying them. We have more builds coming, so stay tuned for those. If there's something that you would specifically like to see, let me know in the comments below.